Picture this. Somewhere in ancient Persia, nearly 2,000 years ago, a group of men stand on a rooftop observatory under a blanket of stars so bright, so clear, that you could navigate entire continents by their light. These aren't ordinary men. They are the Magi, the most brilliant minds of their generation, astronomer priests who have spent their entire lives decoding the language of the heavens. And on this particular night, they see something in the heavens, a special star, a star unlike any other star they have ever seen. This star is something that will send them on a journey of over 1,000 miles across deserts, mountains, and hostile territories, following a celestial phenomenon that modern science is still trying to explain. This is the story of the stars leading these men to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords of this earth. And this is also the story of how ancient astronomers, using nothing but their naked eyes and centuries of accumulated knowledge, tracked what may have been the most significant astronomical event in human history. An event so precise, so perfectly timed, that it challenges everything we think we know about coincidence, destiny, and the fabric of reality itself. Tonight, we're going to follow the science. We're going to examine the astronomical data, and what we discover might just blow your mind. Before we can understand what the Magi saw, we need to understand who they were. And here's where the story gets fascinating, because these weren't mythical figures or religious caricatures. The Magi were real. They were part of an ancient professional class that we have extensive historical records about. The word Magi comes from the Greek word magos, which referred to a specific priestly caste in ancient Persia and Babylonia. Think of them as a combination of astronomers, advisors to kings, and keepers of ancient wisdom. These were the intellectual elite of the ancient world, the people who kings consulted before making major decisions about war, agriculture, coronations, and the fate of nations. But here's what most people don't realize. To the Magi, astronomy and astrology were the same thing. There was no distinction. The movement of the planets, the appearance of comets, the alignment of stars. These weren't just pretty lights in the sky. They were a language, a divine communication system. The Magi believed, as did virtually every ancient civilization, that the heavens were directly connected to events on Earth. Now you might be thinking, well, that's just superstition, right? But hold that thought. Because what the Magi were actually doing was incredibly sophisticated observational science. They kept meticulous records spanning centuries. They could predict eclipses. They understood planetary retrograde motion. They had mathematical models of celestial mechanics that wouldn't be matched in Europe for over 1,000 years. The Babylonian astronomical diaries, clay tablets containing daily observations of the sky, are so precise that modern astronomers use them to refine our understanding of ancient celestial events. These people knew what they were doing. They watched the sky every single night, recording every anomaly, every unusual alignment, every unexpected appearance. And they had a specific reason for this obsession. In their worldview, the birth of a great king, the fall of an empire, the coming of a Messiah, these earth-shaking events would be announced in the heavens first. The sky was the ultimate news broadcast, and they were the ones trained to read it. So when the Gospel of Matthew tells us that the Magi arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising," this isn't a vague, poetic statement. This is the language of professional astronomers reporting a specific observation of a specific phenomenon that they interpreted as signifying the birth of a new king in Judea. The question we need to ask is this: what could they have possibly seen that was so significant, so unmistakable, that it would compel them to undertake a dangerous journey of over 1,000 miles to find a child they believed would change the world? This is where the story moves from history into hard science. Because here's the thing, we can actually rewind the sky. Using modern astronomical software, we can recreate with stunning precision exactly what the night sky looked like from any location on Earth at any point in history. We can see what the Magi saw. And when you do that, when you run the astronomical data for the years around the birth of Jesus, something extraordinary emerges. Not one, but several astronomical events of stunning rarity and significance, any one of which would have sent the Magi running for their camels. Let's start with the strongest scientific candidate, the triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 7 BC. Now, a conjunction is when two planets appear to meet or pass extremely close to each other in the sky. To the naked eye, they look like they're almost touching, or in some cases, merge into a single bright object. Conjunctions happen, but they're relatively rare. What makes this one absolutely mind-blowing is that it happened 3 times in a single year, and all 3 times it occurred in the constellation Pisces. Let me break down why this would have made the Magi lose their minds. First, Jupiter. To ancient astronomers across every civilization, Jupiter was the king planet, the planet of royalty, power, and divine authority. When Jupiter moved into a prominent position, it signified kings, rulers, emperors. Second, Saturn. In ancient astrological tradition, Saturn was specifically associated with the Jewish people and the land of Judea. It was considered the protector planet of the Jews. Third, Pisces. The constellation Pisces, the fish, was also connected in ancient tradition to the Jewish nation and to prophecies about the end times and the coming of a Messiah figure. So let's put this together. The king planet and the Jewish planet come together not once, not twice, but 3 times in a single year, and every single time it happens in the constellation specifically associated with Jewish prophecy and the coming of a great deliverer. To a Magi astronomer trained in reading celestial signs, this would be like seeing a headline written across the sky in 50-foot letters, "The King of the Jews is being born right now, this year." But it gets even incredible. This triple conjunction, this celestial dance of Jupiter and Saturn, occurred due to a phenomenon called retrograde motion. From Earth's perspective, as our planet overtakes the slower-moving outer planets in their orbits, they appear to slow down, stop, move backward, stop again, and then resume their forward motion. It's an optical illusion created by our relative positions, but the Magi didn't know that. What they saw was Jupiter, the king planet, apparently stopping in the sky, hovering, as if to say, "Pay attention, something is happening right here." And here's where your skeptical mind should be spinning. The mathematical probability of this specific triple conjunction occurring in this specific constellation at this specific point in history, during the exact time period when we know Jesus was born, based on independent historical records, is astronomically small, pun intended. But wait, there's more. In 3 to 2 BC, just a few years later, another spectacular conjunction occurred. This time, Jupiter and Venus, the 2 brightest objects in the night sky besides the sun and moon, came together, and I mean really together. On June 17th, 2 BC, they were so close that to the naked eye, they would have appeared as a single brilliant object, outshining everything else in the sky. Venus, in ancient symbolism, represented birth, fertility, motherhood. Jupiter, again, represented kingship. The 2 merging together would have been interpreted as a clear announcement. The birth of a king is happening. Now here's where it gets weird. We have historical records suggesting that the Magi's journey may have taken up to 2 years, which means they could have been following multiple signs, multiple celestial events, all pointing to the same conclusion. The triple conjunction alerts them that something is coming. They begin their journey. And then, as they approach Judea, the Jupiter-Venus conjunction appears like a confirmation, a celestial GPS signal saying, "You're on the right track, keep going." Could all of this be coincidence? Could it be random chance that multiple rare astronomical events, all carrying symbolic meaning specifically related to the birth of a Jewish king, happened during the exact narrow window of time when Jesus was actually born? You can decide for yourself, but the numbers don't lie. And the ancient astronomers who witnessed these events certainly didn't think it was random. So the Magi see the signs. They interpret the celestial message, And they make a decision that, when you really think about it, is absolutely insane. They're going to leave everything behind, their homes, their positions, their comfort and security, and travel over 1,000 miles across some of the most hostile terrain on Earth to find a child they've never met, based entirely on what they've seen in the sky. Put yourself in their position for a moment. You're a respected astronomer priest in Persia, you have status, wealth, influence, and you're going to risk all of it, possibly risk your life, to chase a star? This is not the behavior of superstitious fools. This is the behavior of people who are absolutely convinced, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that what they've witnessed in the heavens is real, significant, and worth everything they have. The journey itself would have taken months, possibly over a year. Ancient trade routes from Persia to Jerusalem covered over 1,000 miles of desert, mountain passes, and bandit-infested territory. They would have traveled with a caravan, with supplies, with guards, with gifts befitting a king, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And every night they would have watched the sky, tracking the movements of the planets, confirming that they were still following the right sign, that the celestial message was still pointing them westward toward Judea. Think about the level of faith that requires. Not religious faith necessarily, but faith in their own observations, their own calculations, their own interpretation of astronomical data. They were literally betting their lives that they had read the heavens correctly. And then they arrive in Jerusalem, the obvious place to look for the birth of a new Jewish king. And what do? They walk right up to the current king, Herod, and essentially announce, "Hey, we're looking for the new king who's just been born because we saw his star rising. Where is he?" Now, from Herod's perspective, this is not good news. He's a paranoid tyrant who's already killed members of his own family because he thought they might threaten his power, and now foreign astronomers are showing up claiming that some rival king has just been born. But here's what's fascinating. Herod doesn't dismiss them as crazy. He takes them seriously. He calls in his own advisors, the chief priests and scribes, and asks them where the Messiah is supposed to be born. And they tell him, Bethlehem. It's right there in the ancient prophecies. So Herod sends the Magi to Bethlehem, about 6 miles south of Jerusalem, and asks them to report back when they find this child. And this is where the story takes a turn that frankly defies natural explanation. The Gospel of Matthew tells us that after meeting with Herod, the Magi left Jerusalem, and behold, the star that they had seen at its rising went on before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. Let's pause there, because up until this point, everything we've discussed can be explained by natural astronomical phenomena. Planetary conjunctions, brilliant appearances of Venus and Jupiter, the apparent stationary motion of planets during retrograde, all of this is perfectly consistent with known celestial mechanics. But a star that goes before them and comes to rest over a specific location? That's not how planets work. That's not how stars work. That's not how anything in the sky works according to the laws of physics as we understand them. So what happened? This is the part of the story where even the most hardened skeptic has to stop and scratch their head, because the description of the star's behavior in the final stage of the Magi's journey doesn't match anything that occurs naturally in astronomy. Let's examine the possibilities. First, the natural explanation. Some astronomers have proposed that as the Magi traveled south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, they would have been traveling in the early evening, and certain planets or bright stars would have been visible on the southern horizon. From their perspective, it might have appeared that the celestial object was leading them south. There's also the retrograde motion theory. Remember Jupiter's apparent stopping motion during the triple conjunction?
Some calculations suggest that Jupiter reached its stationary point, where it appears to stop moving in the sky, right around the time the Magi would have been traveling to Bethlehem. From their perspective, having followed Jupiter's movements for months or years, seeing it suddenly stop over the region of Bethlehem would have been the ultimate confirmation that they had arrived at the right place. But here's the problem with all of these explanations. The Gospel account doesn't say the star appeared generally over Bethlehem or over the region. It says the star came to rest over the place where the child was. That's not describing a planet on the horizon. That's describing something that pinpointed a specific house in a specific town. A planet can't do that. A star definitely can't do that. Even a comet, which some early Christian scholars like Origen suggested, can't hover over a single building. This is why many astronomers and theologians who study this phenomenon conclude that the Star of Bethlehem was actually two things. It started as a natural astronomical event, a spectacular conjunction or series of conjunctions that the Magi correctly interpreted as signaling the birth of the Jewish Messiah. That's what got them moving, what guided them across 1,000 miles of desert and mountain. But the final stage, the star leading them to a specific location and hovering over a specific place, that required something beyond natural astronomy. That required what believers would call a miracle, a direct intervention by God using the Magi's expertise to guide them to the exact location. And here's what's absolutely fascinating about that interpretation. If you believe that some higher power wanted to announce the birth of Jesus to the world, what better way to do it than to use the language of the heavens, to speak to the people who were trained to listen, to create an astronomical event so spectacular, so precisely timed that the world's most brilliant astronomers would recognize it as significant and follow it? The Magi weren't just following a star. They were following a message written in the only universal language that transcends culture, politics, and religion, the mathematics and beauty of the cosmos itself. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This all sounds too convenient, too perfectly orchestrated, too much like a fairy tale. But consider this. We have independent historical confirmation of the astronomical events. The planetary conjunctions happened. We can verify them with mathematical precision. We have historical records of the Magi as a real professional class. We have archaeological evidence of the sophisticated astronomical knowledge possessed by ancient Persian and Babylonian cultures. We have the documented paranoia of Herod and his historical pattern of eliminating potential rivals. All of these pieces fit together. The only question is whether you believe the final piece, the guiding star that defied natural explanation, was miraculous, or whether the entire story has been embellished over time. But here's something to consider. The Gospel of Matthew was written within living memory of these events. People who were alive when this happened would have still been alive when the gospel was written. If Matthew had fabricated the entire story, there would have been eyewitnesses who could have contradicted it. Instead, the story was accepted, remembered, and passed down as history. So what does all this mean? What are we supposed to take away from this strange, fascinating convergence of ancient astronomy, historical record, and religious belief? Let me offer you a few possibilities, and you can decide which one resonates with you. Possibility 1. Pure coincidence. Multiple rare astronomical events just happened to occur during a narrow window of time, and ancient astronomers, predisposed to see meaning in celestial events, interpreted them as significant when they were actually random. The story was then embellished over time to add supernatural elements. Possibility 2. sophisticated astronomical knowledge. The Magi were brilliant observers who understood celestial patterns well enough to predict the convergence of rare events. They used this knowledge to time their journey, and the miraculous elements were actually natural phenomena that seemed miraculous because of how precisely they aligned with the Magi's predictions and expectations. Possibility 3. Intelligent design. Something or someone orchestrated these astronomical events with perfect precision, knowing that the Magi would observe them, interpret them correctly, and follow them to their intended destination. The universe itself became a communication medium, speaking to those who knew how to listen. The truth is, we may never know with absolute certainty which of these explanations is correct. And maybe that's the point. What we do know is this: real astronomers observed real celestial events of stunning rarity. They interpreted those events as significant enough to change their lives. They undertook an incredible journey based on that interpretation, and their journey led them to a child who would go on to become arguably the most influential person in human history. You can believe that's all random chance if you want, but the numbers make that hard to accept. The odds against multiple rare astronomical events aligning perfectly with the birth of a historical figure who would reshape human civilization are so astronomical, again, pun intended, that accepting it as pure coincidence requires its own kind of faith.
Or you can believe that there was intentionality behind it. That the universe has patterns and meanings that transcend our current understanding. That the same forces that govern the motion of planets billions of miles away somehow intersect with human destiny in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. The Magi believed that. They bet everything on it. And whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or somewhere in between, you have to admit there's something profound about the image of ancient astronomers following a light across the desert, trusting that the universe was guiding them towards something extraordinary. Because in the end, that's what we all do, isn't it? We follow lights. We search for meaning in patterns. We look up at the stars and ask if there's something more than random chaos. If there's a message written in the fabric of reality itself. The Magi looked up and saw a message. They followed it. And 2,000 years later, we're still trying to understand what it means. Maybe the real miracle isn't the star itself. Maybe the real miracle is that the universe is structured in such a way that brilliant, curious minds can read its language and find guidance in its patterns. Maybe the real miracle is that when we look up at the night sky, even now, with all our scientific knowledge and technological sophistication, we still feel what the Magi felt, a sense of wonder, a hunger for meaning, a belief that we're part of something vast and beautiful and intentional. The Star of Bethlehem, whether you interpret it as natural phenomenon, divine miracle, or something in between, remains one of the most fascinating mysteries in human history. It sits at the intersection of science and faith, reason and wonder, skepticism and belief. And perhaps that's exactly where it's supposed to be. The sky is still there. The stars are still shining. And the question remains, what are they trying to tell us?